Another episode of The Bad Batch is out, and it's everything we could have hoped for. Per usual, there will be spoilers for the episode in this video, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, go do so. That's an order, trooper. It's that time of week again. Another episode of The Bad Batch is out, this time with a pleasant surprise. A visit to Raxis Secundus. Despite Raxis being the capital of the CIS, we almost never saw it in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and it was good to see the planet again and in more detail. In paying a visit to Raxis, however, we got to look at something else that didn't often come up during the Clone Wars, the sympathetic side of the Separatists. After all, for all the terrible things the Separatist Council did, most Separatists weren't all that bad. In fact, it's not at all unreasonable to say that Separatist leaders, like the senator from today's episode, cared more for their people than their Republic counterparts.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. That's a quote from Cassian Andor during the events of Rogue One. It was a quick remark about Andor's dedication to the fight against the Empire, but a powerful one, which I'm sure stuck with most of you after seeing Rogue One for the first time. You might not have known the full story behind that quote, however. When Andor was 6 years old, it was 20 BBY, a full year before the Republic became the Empire. His entry into the fight against the Empire, as he called it, involved throwing rocks at clones and ATTEs that were part of a detachment occupying his homeworld. Cassian Andor and his people were separatists. For beings like Andor, who started off as separatists and then ended up fighting for the rebellion years later, the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War were just one long battle against the tyranny of the core worlds. They saw, as we've established in many previous videos, that the Republic became an empire long before Palpatine declared himself dictator for life. Most of the Separatists who fought in the Clone Wars weren't fighting for the Sith or for the corporate slimeballs on the Separatist Council. They were fighting for an end to the exploitation of their homeworlds. The simplest possible summary of galactic geopolitics in the Star Wars universe was as follows. The core worlds oppressed the Rim. Over the course of the Republic's long history, frontier worlds were always getting chewed up and spit out by core-based corporations. Some were stripped of all their valuable resources and then left to be forgotten, but most were simply exploited and then left in poverty. They were then picked over by pirates looking for scraps and harassed by slavers. Of course, it wasn't just random corporations or even individual core worlds doing all the exploitation out on the Rim. The Republic itself turned a blind eye to it all at best and actively sanctioned it at worst, even going so far as preventing Jedi from intervening. The Republic was so defensive of the interests of the core worlds that there was practically no difference between the core and the Republic itself to many on the Rim. By the time of the Clone Wars, most of the blame for the long millennia of dirty deeds was usually heaped onto the Republic. After all, it was one thing to exploit a planet, but to have the power to stop it and simply let it happen was an even worse sort of evil. Alto Stratus, the leader of the Separatist-backed Jabimi nationalists, summed up how many Rimworlders felt about the Republic in a speech during the Battle of Jabim. For 3,000 years, we were loyal to the Republic, but did they send aid during the brain rot plague? Did they react when the Trandoshans invaded? Where was the Republic when the Lythian pirates killed your parents and mine? The Republic ignored our cries for help until they learned that beneath all the mud, our planet has a heart of ore. Now, they want to control the ore to prevent us from profiting from trade with the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Systems like Jabim, which were so tired of the Republic being a blatant puppet for the core that they were willing to secede, were the bedrock of the CIS. We mostly remember the CIS for its droid army and the Separatist Council that bankrolled it, but they only signed on with the Confederacy right before the Clone Wars. The Separatist crisis didn't begin with them. Instead, it began with the Raxis Address, a fiery speech in which Count Dooku enumerated the crimes of the Republic and declared the formation of a new Confederacy of Independent Systems. For 2 years, this address was followed by wave after wave of secessions. Raxis and the Tyon cluster signed with Dooku early in the crisis. The likes of Andor and Onderon signed on about a year later. Together, these Separatist worlds spent 2 years building up their confederacy on their own, forming the Separatist Parliament on Raxis Secundus to serve as an alternative to the corrupt, gridlocked Galactic Senate. It wasn't until shortly before the outbreak of the Clone Wars that the Separatist Council came onto the scene. The first Separatists, aside from Dooku, had honest goals. In fact, we would argue that the Confederacy of Independent Systems was completely in the right before the Separatist Council came along. It was originally built to be a true government of the people, where all planets and all species would be represented equally and freed from the shackles placed on them by the core. We got to see a little of this in the Clone Wars with Mina Bontiri and the Separatist Parliament. It's rather sad, really, that such a noble cause ended up being tainted by the Separatist Council. Granted, that was the express purpose the Sith had for the CIS, but we digress. Though the non-corporate Separatists clearly cared deeply for their people, as we got to see in this week's Bad Batch episode, we should know that the same was far from true in the Republic. Of course, there were loyalist leaders that cared for their people, with Padme Amidala, Bail Organa, and Mon Mothma in particular coming to mind. But they were a very small minority, outnumbered by corrupt slimeballs that were little better than the members of the Separatist Council. For some loyalist worlds, their leaders were so terrible that anti-separatist rebel groups nearly ended up fighting both sides out of distrust for Republic leadership. Consider, for example, Chem Syndulla's apprehension to ally with Orn Frita during the Battle of Ryloth. All told, the Rim just couldn't win. Under the Republic, much of the galaxy was brutally exploited by the core worlds. Under the CIS, much of the galaxy would have been exploited by the Separatist Council, and under the Empire, the new government cut out the middlemen and did the exploitation itself, subjecting Rim worlds to long-lasting occupations despite the end of the war. We saw some of that in the Bad Batch today. In particular, former Separatist worlds suffered terribly under the Empire. The Empire, after all, maintained the vague concept of separatism to use as a boogeyman to dissuade Imperial citizens from supporting rebel groups, and the Emperor thus couldn't afford to look soft on separatism. Separatist worlds were occupied by the Empire for years after the end of the Clone Wars, and some even became home to permanent military garrisons. No matter how intense the military presence was though, Imperial occupied Separatist worlds were essentially just told to get back to work after the end of the Clone Wars. The same exploitation the Separatists had seceded over was back, and only when the Alliance to Restore the Republic formed was there serious hope for those systems to ever be free of it. We fans of the Clone Wars are used to thinking of the Separatists as the bad guys, just as the Bad Batch was.
I can't believe we're helping a Separatist senator.
So you have said. Repeatedly.
The thing is though, that they weren't. While the CIS was just as evil as the Republic as a whole, most Separatists were genuinely fighting for the freedom that they had been denied for thousands of years. If the Sith hadn't been orchestrating the whole thing, and the Separatist Council thus never existed, the Separatists would have been firmly in the right. So, that's our look at why Separatist worlds cared more about their people than loyalist ones. But what do you think? Have your thoughts about the Seppies changed? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next video.